Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is the Ukraine War news update, second part thereof for the 6th of April 2025. We're going to do some geopolitical updating, and quite a lot to talk about. We're going to start with a pretty fascinating piece in the Times. And I think there's a lot of use. We saw this with Joe Biden when he talked very openly about intelligence concerning the war in Ukraine right at the beginning of the war. He opened it up for the public to give the public a sense of why the US might be doing X, Y, and Z uh, to help shift public opinion, not to manipulate people per se, or at least if you're manipulating their ideas, it's in the right direction towards truth. And I think there's a good reason for the UK to be allowing a Times journalist in on a ship that's doing the work that we'll understand that it was doing here in finding out about how the Russians are interfering with our national security around the coast of the UK. And I think this is definitely a major concern for the um, for the for the British here, and I think it's really useful for the British public to get a consistent understanding of the threat that the Russians are not offering, but that they present for us. And I think that the American public need to understand more about what the Russians are doing towards the US, so that they actually understand why the Americans have been supporting Ukraine during the war indeed in Ukraine. So here we have a Times article saying, and this is Harry York writing in the Times, the Russian censors have been attempting to spy on Britain's nuclear submarines, and they've been found, sorry, by the British military in UK waters. The discovery was deemed a threat to national security and has never been made public until now. The Sunday Times is withholding certain details, including where they were found. It follows a 3-month investigation into how Russia is using its underwater capabilities to map, attempting to hack and potentially sabotage critical national infrastructure. We also uncovered that the British military have found Russian unmanned underwater vehicles lurking next to secret deep sea cables. The assessment at the time was that it was beyond reasonable doubt, and they were there to try and tap or hack the cables. It can also be disclosed that prior to the full scale invasion in 2022, there was credible intelligence suggesting super yachts owned by Russian oligarchs had been used for underwater surveillance and reconnaissance around Britain. As part of my investigation, says York, I was given unprecedented access to RFA, that's Royal Fleet Auxiliary Proteus, the Navy's deep sea surveillance ship, to see how the UK is trying to counter the Russian threat. You can read all about that in their front page exclusive. And again, that's front page Sunday Times talking about how Russia are a tangible threat to the UK and are doing things using super yachts, oligarch super yachts, to help with their work mapping out this or that, or doing this or that. Yeah. By the way, our Royal Fleet the Auxiliary, so the RFA is like they're not naval warships, but they're kind of the support alongside the Navy. So yeah, it's sort of part of the same thing, the logistics, if you like, for the Navy. Okay, Zelensky has criticised the US embassy's response to the Kryvyi attack. I think this is very important, but there's always a trouble with Zelensky speaking his mind about the Americans, because it must be so difficult. He wants to shout to the rafters about what the US is doing, but knows that there's still something the US holds over the Ukrainians. I've been questioning this for a long time. You've heard me say, what is it that they have? And I think it's something to do with ballistic missile targeting. I think that's one of the most important things. Well, interestingly, General Cavoli, who was speaking in front of the committee hearing recently, and you go and watch this full, like, 52-minute video of everything he said, his kind of opening remarks, and then the answers to the questions he was given, is fascinating. He did a really good job of advocating for the Ukrainians, and if only all of the Trump administration could sit and watch this, as they should do, right? Uh, they would get an understanding of the threat that Russia poses. But what I picked out a part of this was where he was talking about what the Americans give to the Ukrainians in terms of capability. He says the Europeans have caught up, and there's a lot that they're doing, but actually we still provide a lot of targeting data and whatnot. And I think that there are unique capabilities that the Americans have when it comes to the targeting of, say, ballistic missiles. And I think you look at what happened in Kryvyi Rih and Kyiv last night, and there's an example of how much there is still to do, how the Ukrainians still need ballistic missiles, but also how much how important the Americans potentially are. So Zelensky criticized the US embassy's response to the Kryvyi Rih attack. Remember, I showed you in this morning's video that you had Ambassador Bridget Brink, the American ambassador, and Martin Harris, the UK ambassador. Same picture, same event, the Kryvyi Rih ballistic missile attack, 19 people died, 9 children. And in Bridget Brink's statement, she couldn't even mention Russia, right? So the Trump administration's not allowed any. There's been a memo, obviously, out where no one's allowed to mention Russia. You're not. You know, it's not. I mean, it's bad enough that you don't find them morally culpable, right? They are clearly morally culpable and are the aggressors. But the fact that you're not even addressing their causal um, determination in this war, like as if Ukraine's just having a war with itself, like Russia's nothing to do with anything. It's just so bizarre. But anyway, he said, such a strong country, Zelensky, about the US, such a strong country, such a strong people, yet such a weak reaction. They're even afraid to say Russian when talking about the missile that killed children. Yes, the war must end, but that requires calling things by their name. We expect the US to fulfill its commitment to finding additional Patriot systems, and that's actually something that they have promised to do since Trump came in. That's one of the more recent ones. I forget where it was. Was it the first Ramstein where Hegseth was there? He's not going to the next one on April the 14th. But yeah, they have promised to get more Patriots for Ukraine. Now, NATO chief Mark Rutte on Ukraine's NATO membership under Trump has said, quote, there's an irreversible path to NATO. When exactly this will happen, we do not know. In the meantime, we are working closely to strengthen Ukraine's forces and compatibility with NATO. So that's good news. Estonia's Foreign Minister Margus Tsahkna has called for stripping Hungary of its EU voting rights. One key reason, if Hungary blocks Russian sanctions in June, or sanctions on Russia, the EU might have to return 240 billion in frozen Russian assets. So that's the Estonian foreign minister. But he's also said Hungary is on Putin's team. And that's really, really overt and needs to be said more often by more people. Hungary are on Russia's side. Estonian Foreign Minister Markus Tsahkna said Hungary is on Putin's team in an interview on German outlet Rheinische Post on April 5th. Good to hear that. Now, Ukrainian foreign minister has met with the Hungarian foreign minister, Peter Szijjártó. That's Andriy Sybiha. In Brussels, they discussed solutions to key issues and agreed to hold another round of consultations between their teams next week. So at least there is that, I guess. Now, going across to Armenia, the president of Armenia has signed a law initiating the country's accession to the European Union. The problem with, and we talked about this, I've talked about this a number of times, Marika Mikiashvili mentioned this, Armenia can't join the EU until Georgia is free of Georgian Dream and is able to navigate its own path independently from Russia. It is, you're not going to have a country that's completely, landlocked or surrounded by nations who are not in the EU, being in the EU, and Armenia next door wanting to join the EU, but being stifled by the Russians, and then having Armenia just to the east wanting to do what Georgia have done. But how are they going to be able to do trade or really effectively be a part of the EU in that kind of geographical situation? So it's often thought that Armenia's future in the EU, if that's ever going to happen, is completely contingent upon Georgia joining the EU. And that's looking, with each passing day, further and further away, sadly. Now, Germany is considering withdrawing its 1,200-ton gold reserves worth 113 billion euros from the US over concerns about Trump's policies, according to the Daily Telegraph. This is incredible. And, it makes you realize that many countries are very worried about the US and their positioning, because it seems that you know the US could be so unreliable that actually looking after your gold reserves, thinking that you're a solid ally and partner, is no longer taken. Is no longer a given. Um, we have this. So, uh, Justin, European Union prepares to fine Elon Musk 1 million dollars. Sorry, that's his ex. $1 million for disinformation. I think it's probably 1 million euros actually. Uh, Now, that was a bit of news that I reported the other day. Mike Lee, who uh, is it Utah that he's the senator for? If the EU does this, we leave NATO. Can you see how certain MAGA Republicans, sorry, are connecting everything to do with uh, US government and governance with the oligarchs who support that and their kind of future. So, if their companies are going to be acted against outside of the nation of the US over there, then we need to be fighting on their behalf. Yeah, okay, national interest and all that. But what if those companies are doing things like spreading disinformation or allowing disinformation to spread without taking the requisite actions? Surely they should be punished. So basically, what people like Mike Lee is saying is our companies should be able to do what they like and they should be able to break laws. And if you come down hard on them for breaking the laws, then we're going to screw you over. Well, that's just bullying behavior that advocates for immorality, right? Um, and here it's a connection of all of these ideas with NATO, EU alliances, etc., etc. Like, oh, if you do that, we're just going to leave NATO, like a big child, but also shows the limited knowledge he has of probably understanding of the US's position in NATO and how that works for the US's benefit in so many ways. And at the moment, it looks like people like Mike Lee are just absolutely adamant that the US is just going to take itself out from the world. It might as well punt itself to the moon, punt itself to Saturn or something, and just exist in some completely different dimension. It's just incredible. Meanwhile, the president of peace, Donald Trump, Iran's supreme leader, has put the army on high alert in light of Trump's threats to Tehran. So I think, like I said before, you will see strikes on Tehran, strikes on Iran that will coincide with the tariff war, the trade war, because I think it will act as a distraction. Oh, look at the shiny things type approach. And then we have, I just want, I'm wearing a Northland rugby top for, show my New Zealand love. My sister's over from New Zealand with her Kiwi husband and their two Kiwi kids. So I thought I'd throw in some New Zealand stuff here. So Phil Goff breaks his silence, saying nothing about Trump as being complicit. This is really interesting, both in terms of international politics and Trump in general, but also Ukraine. So Phil Goff was the High Commissioner from New Zealand to the UK, and he was essentially dismissed, kind of sacked by the New Zealand government for criticising Donald Trump. He says he accepts the decision and is not in a feud with him, but he says the things Trump is doing are bloody insane. Right. But this has quite a bit to do with Ukraine as well. So New Zealand's sacked High Commissioner to London, Phil Goff, said keeping silent about things US President Trump was doing and saying felt like being complicit in it. In an interview with the Herald last night, Goff said he had been surprised at his dismissal. I knew I'd taken it to the edge, but I didn't think I'd actually crossed the line to the point that this would be offensive. He also issued a full statement, and it's below the story. I'm not going to read a full statement, but it is well worth reading, saying he had a duty to ask the question. He did not regret it, and he would be on the right side of history. By saying nothing, New Zealand and many other countries was effectively condoning and being complicit in what Trump was doing, wrote Goff, a former Labour leader, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Defence, and former Auckland mayor. He was appointed High Commissioner under the last Labour government. Goff's offending comments were in a question directed to Finnish Foreign Affairs Minister Elina Valtonen. They came the week after the US told Ukraine it would need to give up land to the invading Russians if it wanted to end the war. A week after the bust up in the Oval Office, when Trump and his Vice President J.D. Vance tore strips off Zelensky, and the week that Trump suspended military aid and intelligence to Ukraine. Gough prefaced his question saying he had been rereading a parliamentary speech by Winston Churchill, who opposed UK Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain signing the Munich Agreement in 1938 on the basis it was the appeasement of an aggressor that would lead to war. So Gough said he turned to Chamberlain. He said, "You had the choice between war and dishonour. You chose dishonour, yet you will have war." It's a very famous quote, as many of us will know. Gough continued, "President Trump has restored the bust of Churchill to the Oval Office. But do you think he really understands history?" And that seemed to be what got him in trouble. When Foreign Minister Winston Peters received reports of the question, he fired Gough, saying they did not represent the views of New Zealand government and that Gough's position was untenable. Gough said last night he thought that his question was to the edge, but I don't think it was over the edge. "I haven't made it into a feud with Winston," etc., etc., etc. Anyway, let's look at some of the quotes that Gough has said. Elsewise. So Gough described some of the policies of the Trump administration, tariffs, climate change, USAID, and foreign policy as, quote, bloody insane and, quote, populism at its very, very worst. I'm going to try my New Zealand accent. Look, this isn't some reality TV show, eh? No, this isn't some reality TV show. Real people are dying and the nation and its democracy is being dismembered in a way that history will surely condemn. Should we be submitting to what Trump is doing without question for fear of offending, or should we be speaking out? My feeling is, and I think the world will move more towards this. Treading lightly doesn't get you anywhere. Submitting to Trump simply seems to encourage him. And of course, I think that's a really good, really salient point. Like, if you submit to Trump, it just encourages him to be more bullying. It's like we said about Putin in the past. You know, people stand up to him, he will back down. Same with Trump. These bullying people, they aren't used to those standing up to him, or they just kind of kill them domestically or get rid of them, disappear them. But of course, you can't do that internationally. Gough and his wife Mary have returned to New Zealand since, and etc. etc. Now, his full sentence, his full statement here is well worth reading and has an awful lot to do with Ukraine as well, and how bizarre it was that Trump called Zelensky a dictator, etc., etc. All, as you can see there. So good to see him, a Kiwi, standing up for what's good and right, and a very full statement that really supports Ukraine's plight, I think. Right, that's my props to New Zealand for today. Let's go on to the peace negotiations and talks, interactions between the US, Russia, and Ukraine. Kaja Kallas from the EU has said the US will not make concessions to Russia that would contradict the red lines of Ukraine and Europe. And this is a problem that the US has, is they want this really quick negotiated settlement. And in order to, I guess, the US don't care, right, that if Ukraine come out worse, you know, they have no, in the Trump administration I'm talking about, they have no concern for the plight of the Ukrainian people and for the desires of Zelensky and his government, right? So a quick deal will likely benefit Russia, and that's fine, especially since they want to get on with extorting Ukraine, taking advantage of their natural resources, and then going into Russia and taking advantage of their natural resources. So that's really what they want to do. But the problem is, in order to get, in many ways, a quick settlement, in order to get a quick minerals deal, there will have to be things that happen that would invalidate Ukraine from joining the EU. So this latest minerals deal apparently would have made it impossible for Ukraine to join the EU. And so Kaja Kallas comes out and says the US won't make concessions to Russia that would contradict the red lines of Ukraine and Europe. According to her, this was assured to her by Rubio during discussions with European allies on NATO. New contacts between Russia and the US can be expected as early as next week, and that's according to Putin's advisor, Kirill Dmitriev. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said that Russia's broken the partial ceasefire several times. It will become clear in a couple of weeks whether Russia is ready for peace or just stalling for time. However, Trump won't participate in endless negotiations, he said. So they are getting frustrated it's going on for so long. This is from a couple of days ago, some of these, but I haven't had a chance to share them in this Geopolitics video. But Rubio is now admitting in public that Russia had broken the ceasefire agreements, and he's not going to wait forever or Trump won't wait forever for Russia to eventually agree to a negotiation. So Rubio said, quote, "We have a certain time when we will wait. We want to see whether they are ready for peace or not. Congress has already started working on a bill on sanctions, and the pressure will already be growing. We will send our message to Moscow, and we hope that Moscow will be ready for peace." Putin's negotiator Dmitriev has said Ukraine joining NATO is not possible. As Putin said, this has also been widely accepted, including by the Trump administration. Some security guarantees for Ukraine may be acceptable, but not NATO, which is therefore interesting because we had Mark Rutte saying that the journey towards NATO is, this is not this is incontrovertible that Ukraine are going to be a member of NATO. The question is just when, not if. But you've got here Putin's lackeys declaring that no, that's never going to happen, and you've got the US being like, no, it's not going to happen. And then we have this. So this is Dmitriev again. In some form, Russia is now open to Western security guarantees for Ukraine. That's never happened before. So Euromaidan Press reported this. So, okay, it's all like runs onto each other. So you've got Mark Rutte saying they will join NATO. You've got Dmitriev saying they're never going to join NATO. And you've now got the Russians accepting that there will have to be some Western security guarantees. And of course, they have to accept this because if there are no security guarantees at all, then there will never be a peace deal. And Russia can't be seen to come out to the US and say, no, there's never going to be a peace deal. Because if they say, no, there's never going to be a peace deal, the Americans will then go hard on Russia, right? So they have to play up to a certain point. And this is the admission. Well, yeah, if we're going to say they can't be a member of NATO, then we're going to have to accept that they are going to have some form of security guarantees. Putin's envoy Dmitriev signals a major shift in Washington talks, suggesting Russia may accept Western security guarantees for Ukraine. Now, what that looks like, whether that will be a case of China playing a role, like as the West, which is kind of weird. Do you know what I mean? Like, what do they mean by those sort of security guarantees? It's rather nebulous. Now, reports say meetings with France, the UK, and Ukraine on troop deployment have started in Kyiv. France is led by General Burkhardt, the UK by Admiral Radakin. A meeting with Zelensky set to discuss foreign contingents. That's really good news. So that's all happening. Right. Okay. So now we're going to go on to more American-centric stuff, but this is so super important. And I am going to let this play out for you, which is, so we're going to start. I've been talking about how the US is sliding towards autocracy. You've got all sorts of stuff happening in every single department. I haven't talked an awful lot about the HHS, Human and Health Services, being run by Robert Kennedy Jr., who is a vaccine denialist and essentially in large swathes of his department, a science denialist, really. Measles vaccines, he's eschewed, and that's led to a massive measles outbreak in Texas that he said, okay, take vitamin C, just take lots of vitamin C, vitamin A, that'll be fine. And then you've had loads of children being admitted with measles and vitamin A or just with vitamin A poisoning, trying to not get measles. Just absolute ridiculousness. Anyway, if you weren't worried, I think this should probably worry you.
I know one of your biggest concerns as you leave the FDA, and I know you're resigning, but obviously not by choice, you wanted to continue doing your work, is biowarfare. That is a big concern you have because of what RFK Jr. is doing in terms of firings. Biowarfare, what are you talking about?
So let me just back it up, if you don't mind, for one quick sec. I just didn't regulate vaccines. I also regulated innovative biologic products. By leaving, I leave behind what we did with cell gene therapies that could have helped people, for instance, kids with cancer who had no other treatments, adults with sickle cell disease. I leave behind people who were doing their best to try to speed up treatments for rare diseases. And I also leave behind a group now gutted that was ready to respond to natural and man-made threats. Yep. At any given time, there are many, many viruses that could come, things like Ebola and others, that could be very dangerous to our country. We had a group that was prepared to deal with those. Additionally, I can't go into all the details, but there were man-made threats that we were prepared to deal with. Having that capacity means that today I believe we are weaker as a nation, and I believe our adversaries know that we are weaker as a nation because we don't have that capacity.
I know one of
So the US is like stripping itself of all these capabilities and all of this knowledge. So we've heard about the kind of censoring of US kind of search capabilities for science documentation, but actually just stripping that stuff from websites and defunding scientific research. And then here we have the FDA, Federal Drug Agency, being self-stripped. I guess you got people resigning because there's so much pressure has been put on them by people like Robert Kennedy Jr. and they're like, no, I can't work in this situation where you're saying I can't do vaccines. That's literally my job. Here's all the science, and if you're just going to ignore it, you're an idiot. But with these people leaving, you are getting just a complete collapsing of the US's ability to do certain things like fight off X, Y, and Z, work against biowarfare, and their adversaries are going to know this, as you just heard. But then it's stuff like Laura Loomer getting like a bunch of people sacked from national security, and actually, when you hear some of the details of that, it's just like shocking. And all of these insane things that are going on is incredible. So here's another incredible situation. So you remember you had a bunch of Venezuelans rounded up, sent to El Salvador and put in a prison. And then it turns out that some of the people who were sent weren't actually Venezuelan gang members. But there doesn't seem to be anything you can do about it. They just rounded up random people, sent them to El Salvador and said, oh, there's nothing we can do about it now. So news, the DOJ, the Department of Justice prosecutor who questioned the Trump administration's decision to deport a Maryland man to El Salvador has been placed on indefinite paid leave for and get this, I cannot believe that this is the statement, quote, failure to zealously advocate for the department. In other words, we don't care about truth and justice. We care about zealotry and zealously advocating for the department, the DOJ, which is an extension of the Trump administration, which is at the top of that pyramid, which sits Donald Trump. That kind of language speaks to me of dictatorship, of complete autocracy. Just incredible. You're put on indefinite paid leave for a failure to zealously advocate for the department. Incredible. Less than 24 hours after defending the government in federal court. Okay, so that happened. And John Favreau from Pod Save America says this. Okay, to recap, what's happened here is a man who's never been charged with anything gets sent to a foreign gulag. He had legal protections from being deported to El Salvador. So he had the protections to stop him from being deported, yet he was deported. The Trump Department of Justice admits it was an error. So there was this admission that they were in error for sending him there. The judge orders him to be returned. The White House defies that court order from the judge. And then the Trump prosecutor who argued the case says it was wrong. And he gets fired. I mean, as John Favreau says, we are so far past the constitutional crisis right now. Just incredible. And what else do we have? NSA Director Tim Hall and his deputy Wendy Noble have been disloyal to President Trump. That is why they've been fired. So this is the Laura Loomer situation. So Laura Loomer, as I reported the other day in a breaking news update, she, as this right-wing extremist influencer who was very close to Trump and then had to be kicked off his campaign because she is such a controversial person. She's a conspiracy theorist nut job, and she's has really heinous views, right? She went and had a meeting with Donald Trump, and then was it up to 6 national security advisors ended up getting sacked on her behest? Who the hell is she to tell what national security advisors should be sacked? So she says herself, NSA Director Tim Hall and his deputy Wendy Noble have been disloyal to the president. So go back to what I was just saying about loyalty. Zealously loyally advocating for. Being disloyal to President Trump, that is why they have been fired. As a Biden appointee, General Hall had no place serving in the Trump administration, given the fact that he was handpicked by General Milley, who was accused of committing treason by President Trump. Of course, I don't need to point out to you the issues with that line of thinking. Someone that was picked by someone else, and we didn't like the someone else, so therefore this person must be bad. See, that's not necessarily the case at all. Why would we want an NSA director who was referred to Biden after being hand-selected by Milley, who told blah, 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 blah? So the reaction to this by Amy McGrath, who is a veteran herself, and what was she? She's a former Marine. That's it. Proud Kentuckian. Was she running for senator in Kentucky? I can't remember. Was she running against Mitch McConnell? Anyway, whatever. I cannot stress how bad this is for our military. 4-star general is fired for not being loyal to Trump. America, our military is loyal to the Constitution, not one man or one political party. We are in deep trouble if this continues. It is incredible that is taking place now. Wow. Goodness me. Then we have USAID being completely effectively defunded, then is being merged into the Secretary of State Department under Rubio. But then, if you remember, there was an earthquake in Burma recently. If you remember, it was only the other day. Earthquake in Burma and Thailand, and the American people were like, where is the USAID response to this? And then, well, there's no USAID. And then they're like, they did send people to Burma. So breaking here, US team in quake zone told they are fired, per source. So the 3-person disaster assessment team who was sent to Myanmar for the US received termination notices while they were staying and sleeping outside. US aid workers were told on all hands call today, per a source familiar. So, as Tom Malinowski says, so Marco Rubio did send 3 USAID team members to assess the terrible earthquake in Burma and then fired them while they were there. Whether you think America should or shouldn't help people in need around the world, there is no justification for such stupidity. Just incredible. Now, we're going to get on to talk about some tariffs. We've got a trade war going on in the world. EU countries will seek to present a united front in the coming days against US Trump tariffs, likely approving a first set of targeted countermeasures on up to $28 billion of US imports from things from dental floss to diamonds. That's according to Reuters in their piece, EU seeks unity and first strike back at Trump tariffs. And of course, I've talked you through, I just think, I can't wait. I talked you through, what Trump's tariffs are seeking to do, but then there's confusion there, really. And like, if you're trying to onshore jobs, why are you putting 46%? Put 46% tariffs on Vietnam. So what's that going to do? Stop Nike sweatshops making cheap sneakers in Vietnam, and so you're going to onshore those manufacturing facilities into the United States, but in order to become price competitive, to make it so that sneakers aren't like $500 to produce, you're going to have have really cheap labor, strip out environmental and workers' rights legislation, so on and so forth. So you've got JD Vance there stitching his sneakers together. Okay. Now, on the one hand, we don't want sweatshops. So we need to make sure that the world has workers' rights and environmental legislation that is somewhat universal. And, we need to work towards that. But it's this bizarre situation where the US has this kind of ham-fisted idea about how to do tariffs that just are incoherent. It's like you just want to be this big, isolated, secure place where you build up these walls, and then hopefully you can still export loads of stuff, but you don't import anything. And of course, that's not how in a global society that countries can operate. But of course, globalism is evil, right? That in other words, being a neighbor is evil. Just interacting with your neighbors in wherever you guys live. Oh, if you talk to your neighbors. Oh, I've got some extra carrots. I've loads of carrots this year. I've got some carrots. Oh, you got some tomatoes. You can have some of my carrots. I'll have some of your tomatoes. Yeah, you evil people doing that neighborly cooperation. It's like, come on, we live in a global society. We need to operate globally to make sure that efficiencies are arrived at, that we're all trading and there's value in our trade. And if you having a trade deficit is not necessarily a bad thing. I shouldn't need to say this again. You've all heard it before, but there shouldn't be a moral evaluation on a trade deficit that, in a way that Trump and Stephen Miller and others are claiming. It's so weird. And in fact, I think Fareed Zakaria here from CNN, he says it pretty much on. He's pretty on point here.
To understand why Donald Trump's tariff policy is insane, consider this. He says that the rest of the world has been ripping the U.S. off. The U.S. is the great victim here. We're going to be liberated. Go anywhere else in the rest of the world, they'll tell you the U.S. has done better than any country in the world in the last 30 or 40 years. U.S. technology companies dominate the world. U.S. banks dominate the world. We sell trillions of dollars of services to the rest of the world. And Trump thinks we're somehow the suckers in this system, and so he's going to burn the house down. It's just stupid. It's also mean. Because what is going to happen is these tariffs, which are taxes, the largest tax increase in 60 years in America, they hurt the poor, the lower middle class the most, because all sales taxes hurt the poor. It's also hurting the poorest countries in the world the most, because they're the ones desperate to get out of poverty, and they can't now export anything to the U.S. Madagascar can't export its vanilla to climb out of poverty. Stupid and mean. That defines Trump's tariff policies.
He's absolutely on point there. I mean, there's nothing incorrect about what he said. It's not only economically illiterate, but it is also just morally reprehensible. And of course, it will affect the poorest in society, both. And I think it's a really interesting point that both inside the US, it's going to affect the poorest as a sales tax. That is how that works. It's a non-progressive tax. So it's always going to hurt the poorest more. They have least money to be able to cope with that. If you're a billionaire, you don't care if an iPhone goes up $1,000, $500. You're like, nah, whatever. I'm a billionaire. What do I care? If you're someone that's just scraped together to be able to afford it's my first iPhone, and now you can't afford it, that's who it affects, right? So they're always going to affect the poorest. But it's about affecting the poorest countries as well. Those countries that you've been helping to bring them up, now you're like, now we're going to smack you down. And of course, the problem with an unstable world and economically destitute areas is it breeds resentment, and it breeds war, and it breeds instability, and that can come back and bite you on the arse. Here we have Tristan Sale saying China's actual tariff rate was only 7.5%. And I've talked to you about the complexity of actually trying to generate a single number for a tariff rate. Like, you can take the average tariffs, but then what if you're like 98% of your imports from, I don't know, from India, 98% of your imports are rice, right? And the other 2% on everything else. And rice has a 3% import tariff, and everything else has like a 50% import tariff. If you're going to average that, you're just going to take, 2%, whatever I said, 3%, and then 50%, and then the average tariff is going to be like, I don't know, 36%. You're like, yeah, but almost all of our goods we've imported was on a 2-3% rate. So that average tariff doesn't really give us an understanding of what's going on, and so on and so forth. There are just loads of problems with doing this. But anyway, even if you do try and find a single number, China's actual tariff rate appears to be about 7.5%. And then, as we know, now they've got 54%, 20% previously, and another 34%. So the 34% here is even not quite accurate. But Trump's minions bungled it. They used AI to claim it was 67%, the tariffs. But of course, we know it was taken from the trade, the imports against exports, and then you divide one by the other and work it out as a percentage and then divide it by 2. So 67% was what it was worked out, and then they slapped a 34% tariff on them by dividing that by 2. But of course, that had nothing to do with actual tariffs. Like I said, these are not reciprocal tariffs. And in any normal way of understanding what reciprocal tariff means. China has now increased its tariff from 7.5% to 34%. Trump instantly made China's tariff 4.5 times worse. He's an idiot, costing us trillions. Just absolute insanity. Now, Trump is negotiating tariff relief with at least 3 countries. So Vietnam, as mentioned earlier, India and Israel. Israel had got rid of all their tariffs the day before. And then Trump's tariffs came out and they had 17% tariffs on. And we've just got rid of our tariffs from down to zero, which is our first indication that the tariff rates had nothing to do with the actual tariff rates that the other countries had on them. So reciprocal tariff would be your tariffs on us in any given sector. We are going to reciprocate by having the same tariffs on your stuff in any given sector. It's not because they had zero tariffs. It was to do with trade deficits and trade surpluses, or imports and exports. And so they had a trade deficit with Israel of, one presumes, 34%, and they halved that to 17%. Every country has called us, says the US. That's the beauty of what we do. We put ourselves in charge. As long as they give us something good, tariffs give us a lot of leverage in negotiations. Basically, the US has been just being a big bully. I was listening to a really fascinating chat between Tim Miller and Adam Kinzinger. We're going to listen to a little bit of that in a second. But I think it was Adam Kinzinger saying, look, I think part of what explains this is, and you can talk about like narcissism, this or that, but this is about Trump feeling the most powerful person in the world. Like, there's nothing more powerful than watching the world bend its knee to you or crumble around you because of something you've done. Like, this is like supreme feeling of power Trump would have right now. He'd be loving it. Not only is the whole world talking about you, not only are all the cameras on you, not only is every single news agency talking about what you're doing in the world, because you, as one of the most powerful countries in the world, if not the most powerful, have put a tariff on everyone, including penguins. Everyone's talking about you, and you're like, yeah, I've screwed everyone over. Check me out. Ugh. Ugh. Just, I think that might have something to do with it. You know, he's loving it. Jaguar Land Rovers halted exports to the US due to Trump's trade war. I mean, this is just, I've picked one random example out, a whole bunch. So the British automaker, which had 25% tariffs on them, because autos, like car manufacturers, have 25% on them, not whatever tariff is from any given country. We have a 10% tariff on us from the US, but 25% on cars. Jaguar Land Rover has taken its step as part of its efforts to combat the consequences of Trump's 25% tariff on foreign cars, according to the Telegraph. The company that employs 38,000 people in the UK will suspend car shipments starting Monday, and it looks for a way to adapt to the price hit on its exports to the US, according to the Times. Earlier reports indicated that tens of thousands of jobs in the UK automotive industry are at risk due to Trump's tariffs. We have around 1,200 anti-Trump protests planned in the US. Well, that was yesterday. So that happened. Over 1,000 protests. Absolutely incredible. Demonstrations were expected to take place in all 50 states, as well as Canada, the UK, France, Germany, Mexico, and Portugal. And it did happen. They were absolutely huge, those protests. In fact, let's go there now. So here we have protests in... so the protests will grow, says Dean Blundell from Canada. Whether US media covers it properly or not, it's a different story. Keep growing these. America, Canada wants you back. So this is just one of the huge protests taking place in the US. That was one of those yesterday. And then you've got, I mean, it's absolutely loads of people there in Boston. Here we have a protest down the streets of New York City. Just incredible. So if we play this, so all the way down that road, all the way up there. And the question will be, I guess, does everyone in the US know? Did everyone know that this was happening yesterday? How widely was this reported? This was Utah. I've never seen anything like it. It says Nate Bluin. Utah, just incredible. So that's very much the sort of place that you wouldn't expect to see such a gathering of, I guess, anti-Trump mania there. And if you see all the pictures sort of coming out of these different places, you get these montage of pictures. My goodness, there were some serious protests. Okay, so going back to where we were, Republicans will face a bloodbath in the 2026 midterm elections if Trump's tariffs trigger a US recession, according to who? Republican Senator Ted Cruz. Wow. So the Financial Times reporting that the US's confrontation with its partners into a full-scale trade war will destroy jobs, significantly increase inflation, and cause real damage to the US economy. So Ted Cruz says Republicans face midterms bloodbath if Trump tariffs trigger the US recession. And that is coming from him. I think that's serious. Now, I'm going to show you this statement from Stephen Miller. You can see the incredible response from Ali Rizvi that I think is so on point, but I'm not going to read it to you. But Stephen Miller, who is an outright fascist, he is in the Trump administration, said, "Why are American streets filled with cars from Europe and Japan, but their streets are empty of American cars, even as we provide defense and security for both?" And the fact that you don't understand this, that you're making your policy, your trade policy, just based on deficits and surpluses, and just thinking, well, minus numbers there, therefore bad, therefore let's punish this country, and then plus numbers here, good, therefore we're still going to punish this country, but only at 10%. So every country gets punished. It's just incredible. But it's like, if you're, I've always said this. I've written articles on what I used to call faux, as in false, FAUX, faux libertarians. These kind of libertarians. I believe in small government. I believe in small government. I believe in a free market. Whether it be Hayek or Mises or whatever. Real free market libertarians. Like, but are you really like that? Paul Ryan up in Congress holding up Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, thinking and saying this is my Bible type thing. Like, seriously, like, I don't think you really believe this, because you want to legislate whether people can have an abortion or not. Reproductive rights. You want to get inside a woman's body. You want to do this. You want to say that they can't sleep with who they want to. So how libertarian are you if you want to control everything about people's personal lives, but actually not control what corporations do, so they can just rape the environment and destroy, do nothing for workers apart from exploit them, etc., etc. It's like, this is a really bizarre kind of libertarianism. But like, as part of that is the idea that the free market gets to determine, as a reflection of consumers who are your society, that get to determine, what people buy and at what price, and etc., etc. So the free market, like, people, consumers, have decided that American cars are not as good as European cars, to the point where some Americans buy European cars because they think they have a greater status, or they're better made, or whatever the reasons are. It doesn't really matter. If they want to buy those vehicles, then they can buy them. What the American manufacturers need to do is go, I wonder why they're buying those. Is it just because they're made in Europe, or are they actually genuinely better in some way than our vehicles, so that people are prepared to pay more for a European vehicle that's imported here? What do we need to do to make sure our American vehicles compete with those European ones, so that, as well, because it's not just about the US here, European vehicles sell better in, I don't know, Japan, Australia? Why are we not selling American vehicles in these other countries, yet European manufacturers are? Like, so the free market, like, you in charge of that car manufacturing company, whatever it is, or some American car manufacturing company, need to go back to the drawing board and say, well, clearly we're not making good enough cars, or the price point is wrong, or this is wrong, or that's wrong, or we need to rebrand, or whatever. Like, just having Stephen Miller, like, as a fascist, sitting on Twitter going so, and then crying over the fact that people in the US aren't buying enough American cars, and people around the world aren't buying enough American cars, and people are buying too many European cars, instead of going out and, I don't know, being some kind of economic fascist and saying, well, in that case, we're going to punish Europe and punish these car manufacturers. Maybe have a chat to an economist or something. And I'm going to go back to this, the Bulwark, Tim Miller with Adam Kinzinger, because I think there's some really interesting observations in a number of places on this. So I'm only going to play one. I really want to do a few of them, but this is the idea that well, actually, I'll let them speak for themselves.
Well, since we're gonna dunk on it, let me just say this too. Like, okay.
Oh yeah, sorry. The context is they've just played a clip of a few people they refer to actually, right-wing MAGA people who are now gone. Actually, this is not good. I don't think Trump's doing the right thing vis-a-vis the tariffs and the trade war. But the reason they've done that is because it's hurting them in the pocket. They're not doing it for any other reason. They're not like, oh yeah, I saw this coming or I predicted it, or and no, not that. They're not saying, oh, this is morally bad or is politically controversial. It's just that it's hurt me personally in the pocket, and therefore it's bad.
Okay, I got it. Your financial pocketbook is taking a hit. So now that it's affecting you financially, right? Now you all of a sudden care. Okay, good. I'm glad that brought you over. What about when you had heard about Russia kidnapping 30,000 children from Ukraine and erasing their identity? And then you saw Donald Trump say, yeah, I don't know whose fault this war is. Putin is actually a pretty good guy. We get along. And you see J.D. Vance say, frankly, I don't care what happens in Ukraine. Or you watch the missiles from Russia blow up high rises in Ukraine. Or blow up grain ships, shut down a grain corridor to starve Africa. So that wasn't the thing that made you dislike Trump. It was that all of a sudden your gajillions of dollars are now only bajillions of dollars, and that's what made you finally stand up. Okay, I'm glad you came around. But a lot of us, it's not the financial side. Like, I would actually take a recession if we were a decent country again over an amazing economy in an evil country. It's the human aspect of this. Like, look, we can want to deport people that are here illegally. We can want border security, but you know what you don't need to do? Is do an ASMR video of dragging chains so that people can sit around and get their goosebumps up and feel like they're watching a patriotic video as families are torn apart and sent to Latin America. That is inhumane. That didn't do it. It was the financial stuff. Good, but I'm glad you came around. So welcome to the team.
That's great.
I hope, though, in the future, maybe you actually care about decency and not just the finance.
Honestly, mic drop moment. That is such a well phrased understanding of, I think, what's been going on. Just yeah, okay, you've been hurt in a pocketbook, but how about decency? And I think this shows that Adam Kinzinger is a decent human. I am going to play this second clip because it's exactly what I've been saying. In fact, phrased so similarly. I've talked about Maslow's hierarchy in this respect previously. I've talked previously about, when you've had 70 years of safety and security in countries that have experienced peace since the Second World War, I think people kind of get not bored. They take for granted safety and security. And yeah, maybe bored. Like, everything's relative, right? So you get really angry about things that are not deserving of getting really angry about. And then you say, right, we're going to change it all because, transgender toilets, let's burn it all down. It's like, gee whiz, really? Like, you care that much about this? Like, have you not just got bored of just having like some kind of stability for so long? That kind of thing. Adam Kinzinger talks about exactly that here.
Again, I don't know. But I also think, so I do think this has done mortal damage to at least the American empire, if you will. But I also think that when you hit people's pocketbooks, right? I've always thought that part of America's problem has been our success. We've been so comfortable that we have the luxury of hating each other and being annoyed by transgender issues and being annoyed by Bud Light because they sent a can to somebody we didn't like because we're comfortable. Once you take away that, it's like Maslow's hierarchy, right? Let's call that, right, those arguments over Bud Light. Well, that's like self-actualization, sort of. Like you can argue about the pinnacle of issues, but you take away your economic prosperity that most Americans have felt. Even those that are in challenging financial positions have never really had to worry about starving on the street. You start taking that away, and all of a sudden your interest starts working down that pyramid. And I got to tell you, I think once you mess with people's financial livelihood, there's nothing you can do to bring them back to saying that Donald Trump is good. Not everybody. Look, there are some that,
Sure.
I mean, literally Donald Trump could skin a cat alive on TV and they wouldn't care. But I think there are people that once they start really feeling that economic pain, maybe will never admit they were wrong, but will change how they vote in the future.
Really interesting. And by the way, anyone out there that knows Adam Kinzinger, he is probably the number one person I want to speak to of all the people. Like, he's so strong on Ukraine. He's a former Republican, just like lawmaker, just really fascinating stories. I honestly, I really want to speak to him. But anyway, I think he's absolutely right there. I've said things so similar to that previously. But yeah, so Chris Owicki, breaking news. This is from Anderson Clayton first. The Republican majority in the North Carolina Court of Appeals rules to overturn the decision of the Wake County Superior Court and the voters in the state in a 2-1 decision to disenfranchise, take away the power from more than 65,000 voters from last year's election. So 65,000 people have had their voting power removed. Chris Owicki says, I've been saying for some time that nobody should assume that the 2026 US midterm elections or the 2028 presidential elections will be free and fair. This case from North Carolina proves the point. Republican judges changing the rules of an election 150 days after it was held. That should worry you. Really, really worry you. Get out on the streets now, protest, because in the US, you are having the guardrails removed. You're having the checks and balances removed so that the US government, as it is at the moment, the Trump administration can stay in power and will stay in power and will not be checked, will not be balanced when it errs at the moment, when it commits atrocities, crimes. I think atrocity is probably too strong a word, but do you know what I mean? It is a scary time, I think, in the United States. A really, truly scary time. I am going to read a very positive thing to end here, though, that I think should talk to all of us in what we do in supporting Ukraine. So going back to Ukraine now. And this is coming from Timmermans here, saying, traveling, visiting friends and the family in SK, which is Slovakia, or is it Sweden, actually? SK is normally Slovakia, though. With my yellow and blue backpack with a massive Ukrainian emblem on it and NATO patches. Today alone, 4 people passed me by and saluted me with a Slava Ukraini. Every bit helps. Even on the plane, my German plane steward was super friendly, told my wife it felt even to be the point of kind of weird as he poured me another triple whiskey. Sorry, English is a bit confusing. So poured me another triple whiskey. While leaving the plane, I noticed he was wearing a Ukrainian pin and he looked at me. On behalf of my wife and the Ukrainian people, I thank you for your support. Caught me by surprise. I could only answer, thank you for protecting our children. So this is absolutely fantastic. I'm not sure about the nationalities going on here and talking about our children, and but the idea is that there are people around, and I love these really positive stories that bring a tear to my eye when we go out and we wear what we think, it's a form of virtue signaling. I know that. Well, it's not. It's kind of like, this is what I stand for. I really stand for this, for supporting Ukraine. And to get people coming up to us and saying, thank you for doing that. I do as well. And all that, I think, is absolutely brilliant. And, I'm sure Ukrainians are over the moon with those of us who do support them and their plight around the world. So yeah, keep doing that, guys, and keep sending me those stories of how you have had an effect, or the experiences you've had while being out and about and showing your love for Ukraine. Anyway, thanks so much for listening and for watching. Really appreciate your support. It's a long one. I haven't done one for a few days, but hopefully it was of interest. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Don't forget that there is the campaign fundraiser that we're doing here at ATP Geopolitics for Car for Ukraine. I've not given that much regard at the moment because I've been away, but please remember that is still ongoing. and help out where you can. In the meantime, though, take care. Speak soon.